So this is a little bit along the lines of Natalie, is basically giving some examples of what you can do in a relatively small country compared with the phenomenal efforts that NASA, ESA, CSA have already put in, and what you can do, especially to reach a diverse audience. So I'm going to touch on 4 points very quickly. The importance of being involved yourself as a small country. Having a big centerpiece for outreach, the use of planetaria, which hasn't come up yet, and how to reach diverse audiences, especially in my case, using also art to do so. So all of this comes on top of the usual outreach that we indeed all do. And I think everybody in this room has been involved in public talks and newspapers. Just today, Adriana Fontana has an interview in one of the Italian newspapers on JDSD. It's fantastic how much the press actually picks it up. But just one example I want to give, because it's a lot of fun, is that we had a public talk during the IAU Symposium on Astrochemistry last summer in a tiny little city in North Michigan, Traverse City. And there it was actually held in the, the theater. And we were competing with Indiana Jones at the time. But people were really around the corner, and it was filled to capacity with close to 500 people. So it was actually very interesting to see how people responded to it. So indeed, the first thing is being involved as a small country yourself. And Amiri was, of course, a very good example of that. Is 10 countries in Europe working on that. And in the Netherlands, we built this part of the spectrometer main optics, but having something to show to the people and having actually the engineers being able to talk on the radio and in the newspapers about it, that they see it's not just the scientists, but it's also the engineers that are so important for making MIRI work. That is, I think, a really important message. And Klaus talked a little bit about is the fact that SCCI decided to give sort of during the commissioning part little updates. I think that was also important because every time there came a little update, you got a question from the newspapers, oh, how is our MIRI doing? and so that when we finally had, could say our MIRI works, that was actually a fantastic moment. So for outreach, what we found actually to be crucial in this case was to have sort of an eye catcher. And the eye catcher we had in this case was a 1 to 10 scale model that actually could do the folding and the unfolding exactly in the way as it worked in space. It was built by the, Space Link, a small company in Sassenheim, not too far from Leiden. There are about 3 models in the entire world, I think. But it was really fantastic because that really caught the attention. Everybody was gathering. If you put it in any big room like here in a church or in this is a botanical garden, people immediately gathered around it, and you could tell a story about it because there's so many aspects of the telescope that you can talk about then. So that was held at numerous events. We also made sure that we always had a children's corner attached to it. So we had these little Lego models of Webb that we had and that the children then could put together, and that was hugely popular as well. Since the big one was a bit difficult to transport to schools, we also had a smaller 1 to 20 scale model made that we could then easily take in sort of a car to take to the many schools that we have visited in that case. So having that showpiece was also very nice to then a larger exhibition that happened in 2023. This was actually put together largely by Pedro Russo, Universe exhibition in the old observatory in Leiden. And here I think also the lessons learned was to have good collaboration with professionals that can produce such a exhibition at a reasonable price. That's because that's always the balance. If you do something locally, you have usually a very small budget. And so how do you do something that is still looks very professional and attracts a lot of people, but is doable? So having this is actually with a Polish company, Science Now, was very important. So having good partners is also key. Then planetary shows. So this is something that we started just before launch. because planetaria are now fantastic with all the software that they have. Lars can tell lots of stories about that. But we thought, okay, well, actually, we can integrate a lecture, an outreach lecture with planetary options, because you can just have, slideshows for 5 or 7 minutes, and then you can say, well, let's travel to JWST, and ooh, there you go. And the whole audience comes along. You can talk where JWST is, you fly past Hubble, and things like that. So then you start talking about exoplanets, and you fly actually to the exoplanets, and et cetera, et cetera. So this has been actually very popular. And we presented it, of course, in planetaria in the Netherlands, in The Hague and Amsterdam, actually also in Groningen. And then we also exported it to Copenhagen. So it was actually relatively easy to develop, and also very little rehearsing. I mean, when I go to a planetarium, it takes only 30 minutes of rehearsal. And then usually the show works very well. So this is just an option to keep in mind, because there are now many powerful planetaria produced. And then one of my hobbies is actually astronomy and art. And so one of the things we did was just after the release of the first images in September, we actually had an exhibition of the first images, but we partnered with one of my colleagues in Leiden, Vincent Iko is also an artist, and he actually had all kinds of interesting drawings and paintings that were actually intermingled with the Hubble images. And we put this actually at the gallery of the University Hospital, at a place that many of the patients actually walk past. And so this was sort of a wonderful way of, and we had many demonstrations. We had the model there again. We had our children's corner, and this was a very good way of interacting with a completely different group of people that when they are actually at that location, they are usually are very stressed, and they don't know what the doctor is going to tell them, and so what procedure they have to undergo, and sort of having this little oasis of art and talking about something different in the big picture was actually very good. Was very helpful. And finally, indeed, so reaching diverse audiences, we have a wonderful science museum in Leiden, which is the Boerhaven Museum, which actually was the European Museum of the year in 2019. And at that time, we had an art and knowledge exhibition actually there, where we were looking forward actually to JWST. And in the 6 months that it was there, right up to COVID, when COVID started, we had about 60,000 visitors. So again, we were trying to reach an audience that you normally don't reach, because with public talks, you usually reach the people that are already interested, rather than the people that don't know yet that they could be interested. And so these kinds of exhibitions in science museums and elsewhere, like in hospitals, can really help with that. And now actually JWST is part of the permanent exhibition of that museum in the so-called Big Questions room. And you see again, of course, the image there of Carina Nebula behind there, and the model again. And so again, we are reaching a lot of different audience in that. So I'll stop there.